Hello, I'm Rick Dior, and today we're going to continue with our Joe Morello Master Studies 2 videos. And this lesson will be on a thing that I used to do with Joe called Joe Fingers. Now, this originally was an exercise written by George Lawrence Stone back in the day, probably the 1940s or so. And he published this in a magazine, The International Musician, somewhere around there. And Joe, it was dedicated to Joe, and he would use this with his students, and he put it in his second book, Master Studies 2. So we'll be going over this today. It's really a great exercise for developing your single stroke roll and also to learn how to relax playing with both your wrists and your fingers. So we'll talk about how to play this, how I practice it, and how I recommend you practice it. So this exercise is built on the concept of fill-ins, which we've been covering a lot in these past videos. So if you have the book, open to page 43 so you can see what I'm talking about. If you don't have the book, I can't post things on the screen since it's a copyright infringement, but I'll try to talk you through it so you might be able to do these at home without the book. They're not that complicated. Well, they're not that complicated to play slowly. They're very complicated to play quickly. So let's start out with number one, and we'll go slowly here at like 100. And that's normally where I'll start my college students who are pretty good, sometimes very good, and they already have good technique. Now, if you don't have good technique, you need to start slower than that. Speed is not as important as evenness and relaxation. And you'll never get speed unless you're relaxed. And you certainly won't be even unless you're relaxed. So that's the key word for these exercises is relaxed technique. Okay, so let's start at 100 and we'll do number one. I'll do it a few times for you. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you see there, I'm leading with my left hand. That's something that we did a lot in our lessons. In other words, my lessons with Joe, he'd have me lead with my weaker hand, which for me is my left hand since I'm right-handed. Now, everybody has a weak hand. Nobody is truly ambidextrous. I don't care what you say. Nobody is. So you need to practice these with your weak hand much more than your strong hand because most people have a hard time approaching things from the weak hand. And that's very, very important for soloing and playing jazz and all kinds of different rhythms. So we're going to do all these today leading with the weak hand. Not to say you can't do them with the strong hand, but I would suggest you lead with the weak hand, and that's how they're written. Now you see he starts out with a group of eighth notes, and then he puts 16th note triplets on each one of those. And that's it. So the first 10 exercises are those variations. And then Joe wrote 10 more of his own, which are more difficult. So we'll do these first 10 for you, the original George Lawrence Stone exercise. And then after that, I'll play Joe's variations. So I normally like to do these around 125. That's kind of the average tempo I do them at. So to save some time, so this video doesn't get into an hour long, we'll play those for you at 125 today. But again, that's fast, so you don't want to start there. But you will get there. Sometimes I can get them up to as fast as 140. That's on a really good day. I don't push myself, though. The trick is, like I said, the key is to be relaxed. And if I feel stiff, I'll slow down. So you should do that too. So we'll start out with number one. We'll work through number 10. I'll do them at 125. We'll do each one 4 times each. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there you have 1 through 10 of the original exercise. Now let's talk about how we can practice these before we go on. So you saw there I was using a combination of wrists and fingers. For the eighth notes, I'm using a lot of wrists. Now that's never a stiff wrist like this. It's always a bounce stroke. So I'm letting that stick bounce up. So for those accents, now it's very important you have two accent levels, pianissimo, two P's, and then fortissimo. So in other words, well, I should say the accent level is fortissimo and every other note is pianissimo. So those are your two sound levels, all right? So that's how I'm doing those. So you want to ghost those other notes. So number 9 sounds like this. So you see how low my other notes are, and that's important. So that's a height thing. Now on the singles, all the singles, the fast 16th note triplets, I'm using my fingers. So I'm mostly using this first finger. The second one, because my fingers aren't, too long, is along for the ride, but it's still staying very close to the stick. My thumb is also doing a lot of work, if you see there. And my wrist is moving slightly, but it's not a full turn like this. God knows you can never get much speed like that, and it wouldn't sound good. All right. Now, it's very important that you don't generate tension up in your shoulder face area. If you look in the mirror and you're making all kinds of faces and you're doing that and you're doing that, then that's tension. That needs to go away. All right. You're going too fast. Slow down until that goes away, and then build up the tempo so you cannot do that, because that's tension. Any kind of tension is going to be your enemy for doing these kinds of endurance 16th exercises. So that's really important to do that. So you can do these with a little more fingers and like this, or a little more wrist like this. And all I'm doing is I'm closing my hands just a little, maybe a ½ inch, so that my wrist is doing more of the work than the fingers. It's very subtle, all right? But again, don't hold the sticks too tight. So next we come to Joe's variations on these exercises, and these are a little more complex. We're adding some more notes. So these are based on the eighth note triplet, and then we're filling in those eighth note triplets with 32nd note triplets, so groups of 9, in other words. So we'll play one of these slowly for you, the first one, so you can get an idea of what it should sound like. And this is quarter note equals 70. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's number 1, and you see the groups of 9, all right, under the eighth note triplets. So you can pulse these at first if it's difficult to keep track of them. One thing that I do on these exercises is I'll circle the accents, because the notes are so dense, and once you know them, so it's not a problem. But at first you might want to circle the accents so you can see a little better. But you can pulse the triplet like this. Slightly. And then when you go fast and you get better at it, take that out. You don't want to get in the habit of putting accents, whenever you have to do a grouping. You don't need to do that. But to learn it, it's helpful. So we'll play these at a moderate tempo today. I normally do them around 90. Quarter note equals 90. We'll do these at 85 for you today. I'll do each one twice. All right? So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So those are Joe's variations. So you see there I'm using quite a bit more wrist on the 30-second notes. So some fingers. Now it's also important to bounce those. Again, I keep saying it over and over again. Don't play tight like that. Let that stick move. But you can use your wrist to do that. So I hope this helps with the really cool exercise, Joe fingers. And the next lesson we'll work on some of the control studies in this book, which use the Muller technique and are really challenging. So we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.